Hi, welcome to the Conversation Shop with Sedrick Page. I'm here with my very special guest, Mr. Scott Garrett. Welcome, Scott. Today, Scott and I are going to have a very interesting conversation where we will be discussing equity/racial equity and what does that mean to members of the mainstream part of society. So, Scott, again, I want to thank you for joining us or joining the Conversation Shop. Won't you begin by telling my audience a little bit about who you are and why you decided to even come on the show and have this conversation with me?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this. I'm a 49-year-old person of the male persuasion. I live in the suburbs of Minneapolis. I'm an accountant by profession, though I've held a number of different types of professions. I'm a veteran. I served in both the Navy, active duty, and the Minnesota Air National Guard. So I have, I'd like to think, a diversity of experience. And I guess I decided to agree to come here to have this conversation with you, mainly because you and I have had this conversation in the past with ourselves.
Yes.
And I think it's important because one of the problems I see happening in our country today is that there's a real, it's a hard polarization.
Yes.
And there's also an unwillingness to accept what I would call a common group of facts.
Yes.
And we've gotten to this place where it's my way or no way. And no, if my opinion is different than yours, then either you're wrong or I'm wrong, depending on who you're talking to. And no
one wins.
No one wins, and nobody. We're not able to move forward with. We have problems that need to be addressed, and a lot of them were exposed in 2020 for. Exposed in a way that we thought we had taken care of this, but apparently not.
You're right. Right.
But if you're not allowed to have and express an opinion, and when I say have and express an opinion, not have and express a racial bias,
right?
You have to have and express an opinion, and we shouldn't be going after each other for having an opinion. I promise you, said that you and I have different opinions about a number of things.
Right.
But that doesn't make either of us wrong necessarily.
That doesn't make us wrong. And quite frankly, you're still my brother. You're still one of my closest friends in the world. And what I always say to you, Scott, is that it takes all voices, whether we disagree or agree. And when you have conversations, the goal of that conversation should never be to convince the other person to think the way that you do. It's me sharing my opinion, my perspective. You share with me your opinion, your perspective, and somewhere in the middle, we'll find some common ground. Or sometimes you have to agree to disagree, but at the same time, we move forward together. And as we talked about earlier, how do we get to this place of equity for all, right? For everyone, which is what you and I both want to see. But why does it mean me moving forward? And by me moving forward, we're taking something away from you, or taking something away from your family or your kid or your child, right? So those kinds of things. So again, I want to just dive right into this, and I want to set the conversation up correctly. What some of the conversations that Scott and I have, and what I've actually had with some other friends of mine, is this. We talk about equal protection under the law. And me being a person of color, from living in this country with a history of systemic racism, attachments to slavery, all these negative things. So yes, of course, I want to be pushed forward. I want all these doors to be torn down. But from having conversations with Scott and conversations with some of my other friends that look like him, well, what about him? What about equal protection under the law and equity for him and his family? As Scott and I had discussed, he's never owned a slave. He's never done anything negative or has any negative feelings towards anyone that's Black or brown. But at the same time, why is it that when he voices his opinion about wanting to protect his family and wanting to push his family forward, is he in this racist space or this really angry, polarizing space? And quite frankly, I don't agree with that. I'm very appreciative of us being able to have open conversation. So how we're going to start this conversation today is I'm going to turn the floor over to Scott. We're going to talk about, when he was younger, how did he grow up? What was that racial equity, or what did that even mean to him? Did you grow up with any minorities in your community? Or were there things that you saw in your household that may have said, don't mess with them, don't be like, kind of letting us know, because we're all excuse the terminology, we're all slaves to our own experiences. We are how we grew up, what we were taught. As we get older, we learn things, we leave things behind. Some people don't. We just push forward with some of the things that we learn, good or bad. But we're all products of our environment, what we've learned. So, Scott, I'm going to turn the floor over to you and let you address that and speak to that, starting from when you grew up. So we're going to progress this onto adulthood. But what did that racial equity or equity mean to you as a member of the mainstream growing up?
Well, I guess that, obviously my most meaningful experiences initially, elementary school. I grew up on 32nd and Garfield in South Minneapolis. I went to Lindale Elementary School till fifth grade. There was all kinds of diversity all around me. So the idea that that kind of diversity didn't exist, that was never anything that resonated with me, because I saw it. I was exposed to it. I had African American friends, and I had Native American friends. I have Native American cousins. So it's and we moved out to Minnetonka, the Hopkins Minnetonka area, and I attended junior high school at North Junior High, and went to Hopkins High School, and there's plenty of diversity there too.
Okay.
So, I guess I really didn't notice it until my senior year of high school, when I moved out to Western New York. I went to live with my dad.
Okay.
I was in a small community called Geneseo, New York, and it was predominantly white, and and I think at least among the high school age kids, I feel like there was maybe 3 people in our class that were minorities.
Okay.
So that was, I guess I would equate that experience more similar to, what I think is a more common experience for people who look like me, who didn't grow up in the inner city.
And let me add real quickly, and I'll let you pick back up. Just to use me as a counter to that. I grew up, and quite frankly, I never went to school with anyone that looked like you until I was technically in college. There was one time when I had a Caucasian gentleman and his sister that came to my elementary school. They didn't last there long, and they left the school mainly because of the history of negativity between the two communities, white and black communities. I'll just put it bluntly, they weren't welcomed very well at the school. And I never agreed with that. I never thought it was right by the way that they were treated, which was really bad. And I believe in owning your stuff. So I have to be honest about that. So it was like, oh, you are part of this community, you treat us bad, so here's our opportunity to do this to you. And we were all kids. You understand what I'm saying? But when you're kids, you're impressionable. And I can only imagine the negative impression that we left on him and his sister when they went to school with us. Instead of leaving a positive one, I think we left a very negative one. And I can definitely say, from what I've heard of other minority children being in the situation that you've been in, meaning my oldest daughter, going to Sun Prairie High School, which is predominantly, Caucasian. Her experience was negative, and she experienced a lot of racial things there and sensitive things there. So again, I wanted to offer a balance to what you were saying. So I'm gonna let you take the last 2 minutes, minute and a half to kind of finish up what you were saying about your experience as a child and relating that to equity.
Well, so again, I would say that because I screwed around in high school and I didn't necessarily get the greatest grades initially, or had a hard time figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. So I went to places like Hennepin Technical College initially, which again, I think you find a fair amount of diversity there.
Now, did you see anything that suggested disparity? Anything that suggested conflict, or were you ever in situations where, someone didn't want you talking to your Native American friend or cousin, or your African American friend or cousin? Did you experience anything like that? And hold that thought. We're going to pick right back up on this on the next segment. We'll be right back on The Conversation Shop. Hi, guys. Welcome back to The Conversation Shop with Sedrick Page. Again, I'm here with my very special guest, Mr. Scott Garrett. Today, we're having a conversation on equity/racial equity, and what does that mean to someone that's a part of the quote-unquote mainstream America. Scott is a true Republican with Republican values. And again, for example, when we talk about equity, I have some friends that grew up in small town St. Louis. They're farm boys. They grew up on the farm. They had it hard. They were up 5 a.m, worked hard, Caucasian gentlemen, all their life. Nothing was given to them. Absolutely nothing. They're poor, right? So when they go to school or they try to get into college, they see these poor, brown, minority kids, black minority kids being able to, quote unquote, get into the school and get into spaces that they feel they can't get into, and they don't have the same opportunities to get into. So they feel like, I can't go to college because nothing is there to assist me or to help me go. And the assumption is made that I don't need the help because I'm a, quote unquote, member of the mainstream, or let's put it bluntly, I'm a white guy. I don't need help. Everything has been here to push me forward anyway, so screw me, right? So what does that mean for me? And I see a lot of young men in that space getting very angry. A lot of young women in that space being very angry because it seems like they're forgotten about. And as we talk about the Capitol riots and things that have come up, to me, I see a forgotten group of people who feel like they've been forgotten, who feel like they've been pushed to the side, who feel like that their livelihoods are not, it doesn't matter. And it comes last when it comes to pushing everybody else forward, right? And we need to be able to look at all of these different perspectives in order for everybody to come to the table and we move forward together. And these are the hard conversations. And Scott, I want to just dive right into this. So what I want to do is fast forward to a space where you became aware of some of these inequities as it relates to you as a member of the mainstream, as a Republican, as your father being a Republican and having these values.
When we talk about equal opportunity, and what I refer to, or what I believe are hiring quotas.
Okay, let's get into detail about this.
So a lot, and I think this happens at a lot of larger companies. I believe, though I can't prove it, I believe that certainly I have not gotten jobs and have not gotten even interviews at some companies because of the fact that I'm white, because of the fact that these are companies that are predominantly white, and according to the equal opportunity regulations put out by the federal government, they need to get some minorities. What happened to we need to hire the best people for the job?
I understand.
So I get upset about that.
Let me ask you a quick question. Let me ask you a quick question as it pertains to that. But I'm glad you brought that up, because when we hear about quote unquote quotas, tell me, why is it assumed that the person that doesn't look like you isn't qualified?
Well, see, and this is, I don't like quotas. I don't like quotas fundamentally because we're saying that the most qualified candidate, if they don't fall into this grouping, then we're not going to hire them. We're going to hire the most qualified candidate available within the grouping. I'm not a fan of regulating opportunity. I don't believe in it. Okay. I think that we need to get people to a point where they don't look at they look at the merits of the candidate.
And quite frankly, for me, it really doesn't make sense either, because what you're doing is creating this space of anger and resentment that's only going to boil over in the pot. People feeling left behind, people feeling forgotten, people feeling like in this country, screw anybody that looks like Scott, looks like him, and yay for everybody that looks like me and anyone else. And we can't make it in this country unless we're all together. As you're explaining things, tell me, how do we get to this equity if without a quota?
We as human beings, we tend to surround ourselves with people who look like us. That's right. That's human nature. Mm-hmm. And professionally, we need to, in order for there to be equity for everyone, and I believe that that's what we're trying to do. That I would like to think that the whole reason you and I are talking right now is not because we want racial equity for African Americans or equity for Hispanics or equity for we want equity for everybody. Yeah. Everybody. But you can't get around the fact that there are people out there, people who look like me, that honestly, I could walk into places in areas of North Minneapolis, and there are a lot of people who look like you, Sedrick, and they're going to be
not nice to you.
They can be extremely racist towards me.
Right, I agree. What I'll say is, as I explained, racism and discriminatory, what they can be is very discriminatory towards you, because it's how we treat people that we come into and interact with, and we discriminate against them because of what they look like. So I always like to explain to my audience the difference between racism, which has to do with systemic things in power, versus discrimination, which is a result a lot of times of the racism and systemic things, but the online discrimination, right? So here's a question I'll ask for you, Scott. So, for instance, as someone like me who's been in corporate America, I can tell you that I don't really see the parity, right? I'm very thankful to have the opportunities that I've had, but I've technically been the only African American in the building at a lot of companies that I've worked for, the only one in sales. And what I think you'll find when you talk to other professionals that look like me, a lot of times we walk the fine line, right? What I mean by that is, not everyone that looks like you, but you can be me. People that look like you don't have to be excellent. That's the perspective we come from. You can be mediocre. You can have fun. You can laugh. You can do all these things at work. And that's just Scott. He's a great guy. But for me, I have to toe the line. Meaning, literally, when I say toe the line, I can't get upset about anything. Because if I get upset, there he is, the black guy, is he going to get violent? All the negatives come into play. If I'm speaking to a young lady on the phone that's supposed to be in support of me, technically working for me, you can cuss her out, and that's Scott. But if I do anything close to that, I could lose my job. Okay. If I'm out on a meeting with someone, a young lady that looks like you, right, from the mainstream, I have to be aware. Don't be alone with her. Don't let her have an inappropriate conversation with you, because it is not going to matter who started the conversation. What's going to matter is you participated in it, and anything that can be said, you put yourself in a situation where it's your word against hers. And when it's your word against hers, you're going to lose every time. So, and then I have to work 3 times as hard to fight for my position versus someone that looks like you, right? So I look at you and we have these conversations. I go, is there equity, right? Is there? Because, yes, you paid me well. But for instance, we just had a buyout at my company. And I can tell you, it was the funniest thing ever, because I'm the only black person in the company, and I was made to feel that way. Okay. So again, I completely understand your point of view with the quota, because guess what? I was looked at as the quota. I was the first African-American ever hired by this company in 50 years. Do you hear me? So how the hell am I looked at as a quota? And my question to them was, in 50 years, you never saw a Latino, Hispanic, anybody that was qualified to do what I do, and no one had an answer, right? So again, I don't want to turn it over to people that look like me, but I just wanted to give a little balance to the conversation. So again, let's dive right back into this. And there are a couple other things that upset you, right? So let's dive into some of those other things that kind of upset you as a member of the mainstream that, you feel isn't equitable, or that makes you upset, or that you feel isn't fair. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the workplace. I want you to think about this, or even just as a Republican. And as we talk about some of the events that have occurred at the state capitol, to me, right, I see that as privilege. They did that as privilege. And I can say to you right now, if you knew there was a group of blacks or Hispanics that raided we wouldn't have made it to the steps. And that. You'd have been reading about people shot, dead, and arrested. That's how we feel, right? But we have a lot of other people who made that mark. So we don't, where did that anger come from? Let me just ask you that as a member of the mainstream, can you please tell me and my audience, where do you feel that anger came from? Or can you relate to the anger that some of these people felt that were at this rally and in their support of the former President Trump?
Well, I know where their anger comes from.
Please tell me. I would love to know.
Well, let's take, for instance, the discussion of racial profiling.
Mm-hmm.
The police are they go after young black men. They go after Hispanic men, primarily minority men. and the vocal public gets angry with this. And I look at it and I say, well, and this is going to sound terrible, but it's legitimately, I think, reality is that I look at it and I go, if the crimes that are happening in North Minneapolis are being primarily committed by young black men, then pulling over and stopping young black men in North Minneapolis for that doesn't seem like profiling. That seems like, well, these are the guys that are committing the crimes.
So the police are pulling over criminals, basically.
Yeah.
So, there is no issue. So they're pulling over criminals. Yeah. And so they're treating criminals like criminals. So they deserve that treatment.
If they're criminals, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what I want you to get it. Don't sugarcoat it. Let's talk about it. But I also have to give you a caveat. So I deserve that same treatment because I happen to be driving in North Minneapolis. You don't have to answer that, but that's the other caveat to it, right?
And yeah, no, I do understand that. And so, the questions that I keep wanting to have answered is how do we get beyond that?
How do we get beyond it is first understanding where that anger came from. So let's finish talking about this anger that led to this riot.
So the anger is you watched a lot of minorities burning down Lake Street in June.
Let's talk about that.
And there was generally a feeling of solidarity with those. We sympathize with those groups, and the people you saw marching on the Capitol, I don't know necessarily sympathized with those groups. Now I can't draw broad. I can't speak for them, but I can say that it's kind of a counter protest, if you will.
Hold that thought. We're going to pick right up on this when we come right back on the next segment. We'll be right back on the Conversation Shop. Hi, guys. Welcome back to the Conversation Shop. My very special guest, Mr. Scott Garrett, and I are having a very interesting conversation about what is the issue with equity/racial equity as it relates to the mainstream. And Scott and I were having a conversation about the disconnect between how we view or how someone like me may view what happened at the Capitol riots and try to understand the anger. And Scott is comfortable enough and being my friend to share with me where that anger comes from. And Scott, let's just dive right back into this. We talked about the riots over George Floyd, right? They're on Lake Street. They're all over Minneapolis, tearing down, burning down things, fighting with the police, doing all these different things, right? Just tearing up the city. You're scared to have your kids go out. Ain't nobody go anywhere. Then you see predominantly mainstream people that look like you, right? They're on the Capitol Square and they decide to charge the Capitol. What's the difference? Right? What's the difference?
What's the difference? And what makes me mad is the portrayal of the people in the summer. And I understand that the protests that happened in June around the murder of George Floyd, I think we can all agree that should not have happened.
Right.
And it did. It exposed that we have some issues that we've buried and we haven't dealt with. We thought we dealt with it, but all we really did was bury them, and so that it bubbled back up. But the mainstream media's, I guess, portrayal of what was happening on Lake Street and in Chicago and in San Francisco and in LA
Oregon and Portland, right?
In New York City, the destruction, the looting, the rioting, it was given a pass in my opinion,
Mhm.
given a pass because the
They were
grievance
minorities.
was righteous. And,
Mhm.
and I don't I don't disagree with the grievance. I get it. But you can't give lawlessness a pass no matter what the grievance.
So,
And
as it relates to,
fast forward to the Capitol,
Mhm.
where you have a bunch of mainstream people who, unfortunately, were goaded on to believe that they were being wronged, and that they had a grievance, and so that they went and broke into the Capitol and ransacked stuff and stole things and broke into offices, and obviously one of the Capitol police officers is killed, and
but it's the same.
but it's the same. Now, I get that we're going to portray these people as lawless criminals who are doing things that they shouldn't be doing at the Capitol. Yes,
Let me digress real quick.
True.
Give me 1 second. I want to digress. So as we talk about those two, right? The Capitol and the people that participated in it were called patriots, loyalists to the country, right? The difference with the other side, they were called, even now, a lot of them are called patriots. It was patriotism. They were fighting for democracy, right? Okay, but here, I'm gonna let you talk. Give me one other thing. But when you talk about these other places, you heard animals, ghettoism, criminals. They're acting like they came out the jungle. All these code words, right? All these code words for negativity. And one of the main things that I said was, there's no difference between what the rioters did when they were looting, which I agree was wrong, and you and I had that discussion, than what they did, because they should have been called the same things, right? So what do you do with now? On the other hand, you had a lot of people that were arrested. You had people that were shot with rubber bullets. You had people that were beaten. You had the National Guard that was put out to make sure that they kept these people in line, even though these things were happening night after night after night, right? These protests. Mm-hmm. Fast forward to the Capitol, right? You don't have National Guard, these kinds of things. So again, not in disagreement with you, just want to set the parity up correctly. But again, I want to go right back into this. And as I said, please share with my audience, and please don't self-center, because I'm trying to understand, where did the anger come from? So I want to go back to the anger. What were they upset about? What upset you? So let's get into detail about that. And please share that with me. What were they angry about? I get it, the differences in parity, police profiling. Well, they're profiling criminals. They're treating criminals like criminals. There's nothing wrong with you saying that, right? Let me share some with you. I'm gonna let the cat out the bag, right? Mm-hmm. As a person of color and someone that's been over there, there's people who are participating in criminal things over there, right? It's a bad, the neighborhood can be considered rough and rugged, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, as I said, with someone like me driving over there, I don't deserve to be treated like a criminal when I'm not. And the only thing that we ask from the police officers, if I may digress again, is to say that you don't treat all of us as if we have done something wrong. And you don't treat all of us as if we're criminals. But I understand very clearly your vision and where it's coming from, because you don't live over there. We lived out in the suburbs where we was away from all of that. And I get it. I don't want to be in this, because my motto is, if you don't want to be shot, then don't go where the people doing the shootings at, right? Real talk. So again, let's dive right back in, because I don't want to make it about, minorities and what happened to us and what's bad, because I'm really trying to understand why members of the mainstream are upset. So let's get right back into that again. And you have the floor.
Well, some members of the mainstream are upset because they're, in my opinion, not thinking things all the way through. Again, the notion that the election was stolen.
Okay.
Really, I mean, let's think this all the way through.
You're right.
I mean, it just, in my mind, it doesn't hold water. It doesn't make sense. And then to continue to perpetuate the theory that the election was stolen, and that we in the mainstream are getting a raw deal, and it's as if I say it enough times, it makes it true.
Okay.
And it doesn't. So again, I from the standpoint of why the protesters were there in Washington, I disagree fundamentally with them, and I don't understand their anger, because I think that they were being stupid and foolish.
So they were being misled.
But what I do disagree with is what happens is now me as a Republican, as a white male Republican. Oh my God. I am now lumped in with this group. I want to get away from the name calling, but let's face it, they're a little on the mindless side. They're not thinking it all the way through. They're not being logical. And I don't want to get lumped into that group, but I also, don't want to, I don't want the pendulum to swing 180 degrees, where the racism or the discrimination that you've experienced now, because of we're going the other way, and I'm going to get it now. Okay. It's a little like college hazing. Mm-hmm. A lot of the hazing that I got in the Navy, well, we do it to you because they did it to us.
Well, talk to me a little bit about that. Talk to me a little bit about that. Give me some examples of where you see that pendulum swinging back on you, because that's a threat to your equal protection under the law. That's violating your equity. So let's talk about that. Give me some examples of that, and some examples of how those things are, upsetting to the mainstream or someone that happens to look like you. Talk to me in detail about that.
Well, we talked earlier about it. The equal opportunity regulations put in place by the government for hiring. Mm-hmm. What I should be giving you is exact examples of the social programs, but I think that many of the social programs, and I say this without having any fundamental proof of this whatsoever, that they are aimed and geared towards minorities. That someone like me is going to have to jump through a few extra hoops in order to qualify for some of the social programs that minorities are able to take full advantage of immediately. And
so there's no help for you. There's no help for those families of people that look like you. Or a lot of people fall through the cracks.
There's perceived. I perceive there to be no help for me. Okay. I am expected to provide and be successful. That's an expectation. Mm-hmm. Now, whether or not I make that expectation of myself, or that's something that I feel society has put on me, I don't know. I don't know. But I am expected to provide and be successful. That's an expectation. Mm-hmm. Now, whether or not I make that expectation of myself, or that's something that I feel society has put on me, I don't know. I don't know. But I am expected but take the idea of going in and getting unemployment. I mean, I've only been on unemployment once in my life, and I felt terrible about it.
Right. No, I hear you.
And I wouldn't, I see happening in the inner city where you've got minorities, they have a lot of kids, they have them out of wedlock, they get they get into the system, and
so they're abusing that system, right?
I think some do.
Hold that thought. We're going to pick this up on the next segment. We'll be right back on The Conversation Shop. Hi, guys. Welcome back to The Conversation Shop. Scott and I are having a very great conversation in relationship to equity/racial equity and what does it mean to the mainstream. Scott, you and I were having a conversation. You were describing to me, one of the things that makes the mainstream angry, right? What feels like it's not a lot of equity. Someone like you has to jump through hoops for social programs, but there's minorities and people that look like me and having these kids, these babies, and just getting all this money and just ransacking the system. And that's okay to view that. And that doesn't make you a bad person, but it speaks to things that make the mainstream angry. So I want us to dive right back into this and give us some more examples of what makes the mainstream angry and where you don't feel there's any equity. Because again, until we understand these things, there'll never be equity for everyone, which is the goal that we're all trying to reach.
The abuse of the system and the continued call for social programs to take care of people who, in my opinion, probably ought to be taking care of themselves, because after all, I'm required to take care of myself. And Sedrick, last time I checked, you're required to take care of yourself.
Exactly.
And that does. Well,
those are valid concerns. Let me say this to you, Scott. Those are valid concerns. So don't think they're not valid concerns. Some people may get pissed off about them, but a lot of people who get mad about that are people who participated in some of those programs and who may have taken advantage a little bit. Okay? Because it's like, you don't get offended unless it cuts. If it cuts, then maybe, you need to look in the mirror. So, again, talk to me some more about some of the other things that you feel there is no equity or that may play into this anger from the mainstream.
Again, go back to the difference of the portrayals of the two protest groups.
Right.
and you mentioned some code buzzwords that were talked about during the summer protests. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest with you, I don't recall those portrayals, say Fox News, but I don't. If I was watching CBS, ABC, NBC, I saw nothing but I was. It's almost as if I was being told, and this causes the anger too. I'm being told that I need to be more sympathetic to your history, to your cause, to your background.
Okay.
and why? Why do I have to be sympathetic to your background? How about you be sympathetic to my background? And
right.
Again, neither one of us was born in 1861.
Right. No, I understand. Exactly. I understand exactly where you're coming from. But again, let me digress a little bit. I have to for my audience. Mm-hmm. So as I hear you say that, I'll say to you that when my kids go to school, they're engulfed in your background.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When I go to college, I'm engulfed. I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison. We made up less than 1%
Yep.
at the school. So I'm engulfed in your history.
Right.
I'm engulfed in it every day. So again, I just want to offer that perspective. But again, let's dive right in, because I think you're valid in what makes people upset. But again, I have to digress to make it just a little balanced. But again, talk to me a little bit more about that.
But you're right. You're absolutely right. People get upset when two things happen. One is they're threatened, and the other is they're afraid.
Talk to me about that. What is threatening about when you hear the buzzwords equity, and what do you feel makes the mainstream afraid? What are they afraid of losing?
We're afraid of losing our history. I look at what's being taught in high schools now, what's being taught on college campuses now. I look at the renaming of things, the dismissal of any of the positive attributes that a particular historical figure may have contributed, because they own slaves. So they are no longer worthy of being mentioned, and their accomplishments are thrown out.
And let me state this. Let me go ahead. I'm gonna state this real quick. I believe in owning your shit. So I think you gotta, excuse my language, but I believe you gotta tell it all. The truth will, quote unquote, set you free. So I'm actually in agreement with you, Scott, in that those things shouldn't be happening. But I have to share with you, I didn't really think of that, what you just shared with me. I really, really didn't think of that. And I really appreciate you bringing that point up, because I didn't understand what removing some of these things meant to, as it affected your history as a member of the mainstream in this country. So by all means, please, again, go into detail with this. I thank you for this honesty.
Well, I think that what you've got is a feeling of being backed into a corner, and having that history removed and having it replaced. And you're absolutely right. We need to tell the whole story. So instead of going and removing some and adding some, we should just keep what we've got and add some more for context.
Can't argue with that.
And merge it together.
Because that's the truth. That's right. Telling the whole story.
But again, I also think that there's a segment of the mainstream population that can no longer agree with or agree on what the truth and what the facts are. And that's a hard place to be. I'm not there, so I'm not there, which is why you and I can have the conversation, because I do think that we can agree on a common set of facts. But there are people out there that they've closed their minds so much, and in my opinion, it is because they are afraid of losing status, history, whatever it is that they're trying to hang on to, that they're afraid of losing it. I think that former President Trump kind of embodied the idea that we need to hang on to this, the nationalism that he talked about, that he tried to put forward, this building a wall, which again I find amusing, because we are a nation of immigrants.
Yes. But let me ask you this real quickly.
audience.
Real quickly, I really appreciate your honesty and you sharing all of these things with me. But as we come to a close on the show, I want you to take about a minute or so to leave my audience with some words of wisdom. By all means, reiterate the things that affect equity and where you think it's unfair, but leave us with some words of wisdom.
It is my hope that that someone who'd be willing to watch this and willing to examine themselves and willing to examine, the opinions that are out there, that that they're willing to listen. We all have to stop judging people and stop shaming people and start listening to people. They may not agree with you. That's okay. It's okay to not agree. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say, I have a right to agree.
Right.
So, let's value each other and let's value each other's opinions. And to just be, to coin a stupid cliche, let's just all get along.
I hear you. I appreciate that. Well, guys, I want to thank you for joining Mr. Scott Garrett, my very special guest, and I thank you and respect you to the utmost, Scott. But again, I want to take you back to Scott and our original conversation, which is it takes all voices coming to the table and being heard. And sometimes having those hard conversations, hearing things you may not like or disagree with, are the only way to push us forward. And that is the only way that we're going to have equity for all, which is the only way this country is going to move together and move forward positively. I thank you and join us next time on The Conversation Shop.